60 Minutes Rewind.
If you have the feeling you're living in a state of constant crisis, the cities, inflation, energy, crime, there's one American community where none of this exists. A place where medical care is free, where cigarettes cost 25 cents a pack. Gasoline is still 42 cents a gallon and plenty of it. A place free of pollution, with gently winding roads and carefully manicured lawns. Of course, it isn't the United States at all. It's a 500-square-mile enclave presided over by Washington. But today, its way of life is threatened by a game of international politics over which it has no control. The game centers on this great interocean waterway, this monument to American engineering, the Panama Canal. For 60 years, it has been one government enterprise that really works. Operated on a 24-hour basis, it now serves 40 ships a day on the 50-mile trip between the Atlantic and the Pacific. Remarkably, the tolls are the same today as they were in 1914 when the canal opened. The all-time bargain in international shipping. The Panama Canal Company, the government agency that runs the canal and the 10-mile-wide canal zone that surrounds it, receives $100 million a year in tolls. The tiny country of Panama, which this zone cuts in two, receives less than $2 million a year.
And therein lies the problem. Henry Kissinger and the State Department have shown concern about the situation and have begun negotiations to return to Panama sovereignty over the canal zone. But even if an agreement is reached, 2/3 of the Senate must approve a new treaty, and 35 of the 100 senators, more than a third, have already gone on record that they will block any attempt to give up U.S. sovereignty over the canal zone.
But to understand the present difficulties the United States is having with Panama over the canal, you have to go back to 1903 and perhaps a classic example of international chicanery. Then Panama was part of Colombia, and a canal had already been started across the isthmus by a French company. That canal was a disaster. 20,000 people died in the jungles of yellow fever. The United States watched with interest as the project was abandoned. In 1903, a revolution broke out, Panamanians seeking independence. The U.S. was quick to support the rebels and within 3 days recognized the new state. It was a masterstroke of diplomacy or something by Teddy Roosevelt. For within 2 weeks, he had pressured an agreement with Panama, giving the United States a 10-mile-wide strip of Panama forever. In 1914, the canal was officially opened. Running against the tide of history, he was placing the stars and stripes firmly into the belly of Central America. This may be the most graphic representation of those 60 years. The border between the U.S. Canal Zone and the city of Panama. Over here, the Yankee dream of international suburbia come true. And over here, Central American lassitude sprawling itself up to the very edge of foreign prosperity. But in the world of 1974, it's become necessary to justify the American presence here, any big power presence in any alien land. No matter how much it may benefit the local population, no matter how many aid programs may exist, no matter how much American know-how is really needed here. It is still called colonialism, perhaps the dirtiest word in the lexicon of the so-called new morality. And what was acceptable as big stick diplomacy in 1914 is an affront to the eyes in 1974. By chance or design, the worst slums in Panama City butt up against the fences of the canal zone. The zone is the United States. And while Panamanians may enter and leave it freely, they are aliens when they're inside the fence. It has its own police force, schools, hospitals, and courts. It is a suburb of Washington for expatriate American civil servants. A Panamanian breaking the law is subject to American justice, which may indeed be more just than Panamanian, but still grates on the sensibilities beyond the fence.
We are not completely independent because a foreign government has been established in the Canal Zone against our will. And that is the main irritant.
Dr. Carlos Lopez Govera is Panama's negotiator in the current attempt to tear up the 1903 treaty.
a treaty has been imposed upon us, a treaty non-negotiated, a treaty which, in the way it has been construed, gives every right to the United States and all the burdens to Panama.
Officially, the United States is sympathetic to Panama's position and aware that the mere appearance of American sovereignty over land in another nation is bad public relations. But any move towards withdrawal from Panama by Henry Kissinger will not be made easily. Congress must approve, and in the Congress is a man who regards the canal as American as the Mississippi, Congressman Daniel Flood of Pennsylvania, whose daddy was a friend of Teddy Roosevelt.
Imagine to concede the control of such a vital waterway to a small country which is ill-equipped to administer or defend, I think would be a appalling act of irresponsibility by a great world power. But can you imagine what would happen? So there is a treaty, and the United States gets out of the strategic isthmus of Panama, which has been a target for predatory nations of the world from time immemorial, and always will be, and always will be. So out we get. And who do you think would take control of the Isthmus of Panama? The Republic of Panama? I'll give you one guess who would. The Soviets now control every interoceanic connection in the world, dominated or in a position to control. The Kiel, the Dardanelles, the Suez, the Straits of Malacca, and the only thing left is Panama, and now the domination of Cuba by the Soviet. And you know, you can stand in the main street of Havana and take a bottle of Bacardi with a good arm, you can hit the canal, you know. So you see, a Soviet lake.
And to keep Daniel Flood's red menace, or any menace, at bay, there is the U.S. Armed Forces, an even greater irritation to Panamanians. In the 500 square miles acquired by Teddy Roosevelt, there are 14 American military installations. Panama was the closest thing we had to Vietnam. So the Army used and still uses it for its Jungle Operations Training Center. The Air Force uses it for its Tropical Survival School. There are 35,000 military, including dependents. Their mere presence annoys some Panamanians. To others, the most annoying thing is that they pay virtually no rent. Troops in the zone come under Southern Command. Their stated mission, the defense of the Panama Canal. Congressman Michael Harrington of Massachusetts does not look kindly on the American presence in Panama.
But does Southern Command not serve a very real defense role?
No, I think that the military people, whether it be before the Armed Services Committee or on peripheral testimony before the Foreign Affairs Committee, will all really admit that there are not very strong arguments to make that our hemisphere is in need of protection from that quarter, or that there's any substantial impact that they have.
The story will continue after this.
Defenders of the American military and civilian presence say that the United States has no choice, that Panama is too small, too unstable, too inept to run a sophisticated and vital piece of engineering like the Panama Canal.
You said earlier you didn't think that the Panamanians could run the canal.
Oh, certainly not. Let me tell you this. In the 35, there was in the original treaty a provision for operation, maintenance, and the word sanitation. Well, that offended their sensibilities, and with cause and with reason. So in the 36 treaty, in the 55 treaty, they said, well, will you take that sanitation out? That makes us look very bad. So, by George, that made some sense. So we removed the word sanitation from the treaty. And they couldn't collect the garbage for the next 5 years. Now, can you imagine? They couldn't collect the garbage in Panama City. How in the world could they run the canal? They know they can't. You know they can. They know that you know that you know that they know they can't. So does everybody else.
What do you say to that?
Of course, if we are not given the opportunities to be trained, then we shall never be ready to run the canal. So if we don't have technicians, Panamanian technicians, then we must search for them in other areas. They may be Americans or any other nationality.
Russians?
Any nationality.
Chinese?
If Chinese, or Japanese, German, Americans, Panamanians, Cubans, any nationality. The main fact is that our aim is that we must administer this canal.
It might be a bit oversimplified, but in broad terms, that is the State Department's view as well. At least that the old turn-of-the-century agreement needs some changes for the sake of Latin American goodwill. But even with Dr. Kissinger's great talent for personal diplomacy, this time he is up against a foe that makes Zhou Enlai, Le Duc Tho, the Soviet Politburo, and Middle East disengagement look like softies. This time he must deal with the U.S. Congress and Daniel Aloysius Flood.
Now, you cannot dispose of property of the United States government without action being taken by the Congress, and that includes the House. And let me assure you, I doubt very much if they can get 2/3 in the Senate to confirm a treaty. But even if they do, you can be sure, in my opinion, they will never be able to get a majority in the House of Representatives. All the nations of the world of which you speak who are engaged in commerce are holding their breath while you and I are talking, conceiving or dreading that at any moment the operation, the maintenance, the operation, the defense, the protection of the canal and of the people of Central America, of their rights, of their sovereignty as free and sovereign independent nations, the neighboring nations, big or small, the last thing in the world they will say to you after the formal speech is made is, don't go.